Welcome to the sacred space of self. This video will also double as the one of the videos in the Art of Becoming, the 2018 annual edition. The video camera is not my favorite place to hang out, so bear with me while I warm up and get used to this. I haven't done a major video project for like 6 or 7 months, and I'm here today though with a discussion of Chiron, certain technical aspects of how to work with Chiron. So the beauty of this is that it is a form of advanced astrology that almost anyone can do. It's kind of like Rob Brezhny's super elite club that anyone can join. He does come out with some funny lines every now and then, and that's one. And so we have, you know, advanced astrology, but I'm going to do my best to make it accessible. And a few years back, I taught a class at Omega Institute where I had a whole class full of people working with clients in a matter of like 3 or 4 hours. Like, I just gave a basic introduction, and once you know this, you can do it for yourself. And then you can do it with clients or friends or relatives. But the thing is that you have to be prepared psychologically and spiritually to go into deep water with the person. And by deep water, I mean that they will start to share with you things that have shaped their lives in some way, and things that have had a deep impact on them. So, just to give a little bit of a refresher, Chiron is a relatively new influence in astrology. It was discovered in 1977, and unlike most new points, in fact, unlike any other new point before or since, Chiron was rapidly investigated and experimented with, and astrologers were on a mission to find out what this thing was, and in record time, unsurpassed since. There have been a lot of discoveries since Chiron. They had a fix on what this thing was about, and I have to say that a lot of the early books were really pretty good and got it right, particularly Zane Stein, Chiron, Essence and Application, Barbara Hand Clow, who borrowed heavily from Zane Stein, Melanie Reinhardt, Chiron and the Healing Journey. The Chiron, my Chiron, oopsie, sorry, Henrietta, sorry, oops. This is Henrietta, no. She's here, this is my friend. I'd like to smell her. Okay, so keep my Chiron bookshelf front and center there, right in easy reach. And ephemeris, we will need this just so I can show you what it is. And so in the early 80s, a lot of books came out in pretty rapid succession, and astrologers were curious, and they felt the future coming on, and this was partly a product of the era that they were in, where there was a lot of curiosity about the human condition in the 1970s, and there was a kind of a movement of people who were interested in waking up, and a lot of therapy methods that were coming into play, and people were going to therapists and doing group therapy, and it wasn't all about drugs, which a lot of supposed healing is about these days, and in many ways therapy has been abandoned, or is yeah. So the whole story of Chiron is an outgrowth of the era in which it emerged. And in that era, the concept of the holistic principle was becoming known. And the holistic principle is basically how everything is interrelated, everything is part of everything else. The natural systems are integrated. The human condition is one condition. A person is one integrated entity, and not little parts, like not little, transmission and the radiator, which don't really have that much to do with each other. There may be a loop of, radiator transmission fluid going through the radiator to cool it off, but they're not really related systems in any kind of an actual direct way. But a person is a different thing, different kind of entity. And you don't really understand a person until you understand how all the seemingly separate parts of that person are related to each other. And Chiron will teach us that. So, without getting too much into what Chiron is about, it's important to remember that Chiron is going to manifest differently for everyone, though there will be some common grounds between everyone's Chiron. Some, but a lot of divergent ground. A lot of places where people just have their own experiences. But the experiences for each individual person will tend to go in a direction of improvement or a direction of breakdown. There will be moments of crisis whenever Chiron is active in someone's chart. There'll be some form of critical turning point. And one of the things you're looking for in understanding the process of someone's Chiron is how they adapt from turning point to turning point. Do things get better? Do they get worse? Do they learn how to handle themselves? Do they learn from the previous event into the next one? Now, if it's not obvious already, I'm not thinking of Chiron as a static point in the natal chart, which it is a static point in the natal chart. Little dog. It is a static point in the natal chart, but, however, hi Henrietta, but it is also a thing in motion, and this is essential to remember about all points in astrology. I can't get that to friggin' stop down. You don't get any control of your f-stop on this, on these built-in video cameras. But if I hold the white reflector card up, it closes down the aperture a little bit, and we're not blowing out the pixels. The photographer in me never rests when I'm looking at an image, including of myself. So now that we've got this up here, Chiron is a thing in motion. All planets are a thing in motion. And you want to remember that when you're looking at the chart. You're looking at a snapshot of the teacup ride, but that snapshot is a photo of the teacup ride while it's moving. Right? The natal chart moves. And for those who are curious about the progressed horoscope, one of the most important reasons to work with the progressed horoscope is because it reminds you that the chart is moving. So we're not going to do progressions today. We're going to do the transits of Chiron. And I've got two examples of the transits of Chiron. And what I intend to do is to demonstrate a theory and how the theory plays out. And second, give you a chance to experiment by making it pretty simple how to do this. So first, let's look at a kind of an orbital plot of Chiron. And we've set this chart for Aries rising. And the last two times Chiron was in Aries were 1918, 1919, and 68, 69. Now, 1819 is important because one of the worst things in world history happened 2 Chiron cycles ago when Chiron transitioned from Pisces to Aries. And that was the influenza outbreak that begins in 17. It peaks in late 18. Most of the deaths, from what I've read, we're in the last part of 1918, 100 years ago, October, and then it trails off as people develop immunity to it and other factors. It's still quite mysterious what this thing was and why it happened. But sitting and eating gluten-free pizza the other night over at my friend Renato's pizzeria, I don't usually read whole long Wikipedia pages on my phone. I'm not a big fan of the thing, but I'm looking at these charts and I'm seeing that this influenza outbreak happens in the process of Chiron transitioning from Pisces to Aries, and a lot of people died. The estimates vary wildly from 70 million to 500 million worldwide. I'm inclined to think it's on the higher side, but a big percentage of the world's population was affected. And the fear of that is still lurking around consciousness. It's only a century ago. The idea that a pandemic could wipe out the healthy people, that was the weird thing about H1N1, is it affected primarily the healthy people. All right. One thought about H1N1 is that the homeopathic physicians had pretty good success in curing this thing. And the remedy that was the what's called the genus epidemicus, which is a homeopathic term for when there is an epidemic or a pandemic, someone comes up with, or at least in those days they did, the remedy to address the pandemic, and it's not taken case by case, it's taken as a whole. And the remedy that was used successfully to treat H1N1, this deadly flu that could wipe somebody out in one day, was a remedy called gelsemium. GELS is the abbreviation, and gelsemium is also a remedy for various forms of fear of the variety of stage fright. Stage fright. So when you think of influenza, think of fear. We certainly have a lot of fear going around right now. And when you think of H1N1, aka Spanish flu, in quotes, it wasn't really Spanish, that's Chiron making its transition from Pisces to Aries with remarkable precision. This flu emerges as Chiron, finishes a cycle, crosses the Aries point, dips back, crosses back, exactly what it's doing now. And it is fair to say that we are in the midst of a pandemic of fear. And a lot of the fear is gelsemium fear of performance anxiety. So, that said, the next time around was 68-69. And Chiron begins its journey through Aries on, I believe, April 1st, 1968. And 4 days later, Martin Luther King is killed. 12 weeks later, Bobby Kennedy is killed. So again, we're talking about a lot of fear. So now we're back at that. We're back in that phase of the cycle where fear is a major issue. We have to recognize this and understand what this is about. But it's not easy. In Chiron's orbit, it goes through these four signs: Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, and Taurus in about 34 years, 34, 35. Then Chiron goes through the rest of the zodiac in 15 years. So if you're born with Chiron here, like a lot of people in the 50s, or here, like a lot of people in the 60s, or here, like a lot of people in the 70s, or here, like a lot of people in the 80s, you're born with Chiron moving slowly. And particularly if you're born on the early side of this curve, you're going to have your Chiron transits happen on a completely different schedule. For example, your first Chiron square is not going to happen till you're about 22. For kids born like around here, Chiron square happens at around age 7. This is a very significant difference, and one of the effects is that it gives people a certain measure of proximity with their grandparents more than their parents, since their grandparents tend to be the ones who were born 50 years before, but usually your parents are going to be on the other side of the wheel. 25, 30 years apart in age. So if you're wondering where certain affinities that people have with their grandparents come from, one astrological theory to approach that is Chiron. In this part of its trip, Chiron pretty much acts like an outer planet because it is one and it's moving very slowly. It's moving at the speed of Uranus here, a little bit slower than Uranus here, then it slows back down. It's moving through Gemini about the speed of Uranus, and it picks up speed in Cancer. It whips through Libra in just 18 months. Then it starts slowing down again. It takes 4 years to go through Capricorn, then 7 through Aquarius, and so on back around. So this is a very distinctive cycle. Other planets have this. You know, Pluto in our era can take 12 to 14 years to go through a sign. When Pluto's in Taurus, it can take 20 years to go. It takes 20 years to go through. So, for example, you know, a century ago, people were having their Pluto square at age 60. Today, people have their Pluto square at about age 35. And the Pluto square is a distinct initiation. And today, people have that younger. Take a planet like Saturn, it's 29 years all the time, nice and steady through the signs. So it's, all these orbits are the same, each orbit, but it is a much more stable orbit, and Saturn takes about 2.5 years to go through every sign, so that you always have your first Saturn square at age 7 and your opposition at age 14, and so on. We'll get to exactly what that means. And this technique I'm about to teach can be used for any planet, particularly an outer planet. This doesn't really apply to inner planets like Venus or something like that. A little bit to Jupiter, but really we're starting to work with this with Saturn, Chiron, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. Here's the game. We're going to look at what are called quad alignments or quadrature alignments. I get that term from Rick Tarnas. It's a very nice term to use. So let's pretend that we're looking at now Chiron was in Aries, and I've already started doing this by saying, well, we're in this very fearful time right now where like fear is the thing. It's the thing we all have to like bow down to and worship. And it was also that in 1918-19 and 68-69. All right. The next time Chiron made a quadrature alignment to this point, right? We're starting with Chiron here. This is a hypothetical case, or real in the sense of history. And I think that with Chiron making aspects to the Aries point, which it's doing now, that's about everyone. The Aries point is about all of us, because it's the intersection of the collective and the individual. So, for example, talk about a thing that that impacted everyone personally and collectively, like the H1N1 flu of 1918, or the assassinations of pretty much the last of the great political leaders. All right. So if we go 90 degrees, we come up with Chiron in the early degrees of Cancer in 1988. And so there's going to be a resonance between, for example, 68 and 88. That was the last time Chiron was in Cancer. And because it's now, there'll be a resonance between 88 and now. So when we're looking for a resonance, you can't force it, and you need to be gentle and a bit circumspect and curious about the curious. So, for example, if you're looking for a resonance, start with where you were, and then go to what you were doing. So, for example, in my life, in 1988, I had just gotten my last actual job where I had to go to work every day in someone else's office. And I was getting ready to make a big change, and I didn't necessarily know it, but by the spring of '89, the calling was very strong, and I left my last job. I was editing business newsletters for a company called Whitaker Newsletters, writing about liquor marketing and beer wholesale marketing, and I also edited a journal that focused on nursing and medical education. So I was doing some intense trade journalism and business journalism, but I knew I wasn't going to do that. So at that point, I make a change, and I move upstate and start my own newsletter. I learned the newsletter business from that job, and then I started my own newsletter company. And my current work is pretty much an extension of that now. All right. Just to give an example. So consider what you were doing if you were alive in 68, 69, then 88, and then let's go to the next quad. That is 95. So what was going on in 95? Well, in my life, I changed careers again. 94, 95, I was making a transition from investigative journalist, because I start and through this whole quad here, this whole quarter of the wheel, I'm building a career as an investigative journalist. I start when Chiron is like around in Taurus in the 80s, but I'm really getting cooking in 88, and I fully commit to investigative journalism. But by 95, I'm out of it, and I write my first horoscope column. So again, a turning point, a major turning point in my career. First horoscope chart. Where's the first horoscope chart? It's floating around here somewhere. I wonder what the exact degree position of Chiron is in that chart. All right, I can't find it. Next. Now Chiron's moving quicker. So now it only takes 6 years for Chiron to go through all of Libra, Scorpio. 6 years? Yeah, basically. That's crazy. 6 years for Chiron to go this far. And in 01, it enters Capricorn weeks after 9/11. Again, a turning point for everyone. So in the 9/11 chart, Chiron is in late Sagittarius. And then it enters Capricorn, and basically for the whole first term of the Bush administration, starting in November of 01, when the war in Afghanistan begins, allegedly a response to 9/11, Chiron once again crosses the Aries point and makes a quadrature alignment to its position here in 68, 69, in 88, in 95, and then in 01, there's another personalist political, collectivist individual type of event that basically changes everyone's life in a big way. Here's my little card to block the light. I have my very basic method of illuminating. It's called daylight, which I have to control. I wonder if there's a program. Does anyone know of one where I can control the eyesight camera in the Mac and get some, like, control the exposure? Maybe it's right in iMovie. I'm using the basic built-in stuff here, unlike my usual trip. All right, so then 01 to present, 18 years. Does that add up? 4, 11, and 8, 19 years. That's close. Chiron crosses this quad. It goes through Cap, Aquarius, and Pisces. Need we sum up the madness of Chiron going through Cap, Aquarius, and Pisces? This part of the cycle till now is what we used to call the post 9/11 world. The bizarro shit we live with on a daily basis, where a lot of people have excused themselves from thinking. I don't recommend it. It may seem convenient for a while, but it's not really. This is my favorite tape ever. It's called Artist Tape. And all you need to be an artist is a roll of Artist Tape. This is product placement. I'm kidding about that. Okay, now let's do this. So you've just learned a very important skill, which is the skill of quadrature alignments. And the way you find these positions is in the ephemeris. It is a book. I believe in, oh look, I've got a little picture of Pamela Coleman Smith, one of my favorite people in human history, the author of the Rider-Waite Tarot. That's the title card. Get these. There, I don't have my Aureas. Those are downstairs and other places. But there's an ephemeris called the Aureas, A-U-R-E-A-S ephemeris, that has Chiron. I believe it has Sedna. It has Aries. That's the one to get. It's not cheap. You have to order it, possibly have to order from the astrology shop or in Covent Garden, England, or from Amazon. I used to live down the block from that publishing company. When I moved to Paris, when I got, well, I stayed in, and I was a guest in a client's apartment for 2 weeks in the spring, and then I came back and I stayed in the same apartment 2 weeks in the fall on Ile Saint-Louis, and then I moved to the 5e, the 5th district in Paris. And I officially moved in, toted my stuff like 6 blocks from Ile Saint-Louis, and decided to go out for a walk in my new neighborhood, right? Really exciting. I'm going to live in Paris now. And I knew what the Aureas ephemeris was. I'm an astrologer, and it's like the best ephemeris. So I step out of my building on Rue des Chantiers, and I say, shall I go left or shall I go right? And my intuition says, make a left. So I make a left, get to the corner. Shall I go left or shall I go right? And I make a left on Cardinal and I take about 6 steps, and I'm standing in the office of Aureas. I was more excited than they were. They didn't think it was very special, but they're French. They don't want you to know if they get excited. Non plus is the word in French. They're usually the French don't want you to know how thrilled they are about anything. Everything's like, oh, really? All right, let's pick a new pencil. So here's a hypothetical natal chart with no planets in it. We're just going to use the quad alignments of Chiron. So let's pretend that someone is born with Chiron at 28 Aquarius 1. They're born on 3/160, hypothetical. And let's pretend that the chart is Aries rising 10 degrees. So if I were to working with a client or training students, we know the Chiron's here, 2804 Aquarius. And the first transit I would check would be Chiron crossing the ascendant, because you just check that. You just ask that. And the way that I ask about Chiron crossing the ascendant is, or any transit, is I don't say, what happened? I say, where did you live? You're like, really? Where did I live? Yeah, where did you live? What was your address? And they'll give me an address. And they start thinking. You with me here? because you want to. It's like I once went to a kinesiologist who used this finger for some reason. She said that this finger, my right hand, on everyone's right hand, is the least connected to certain types of issues that interfere with the muscle test. I find that asking where do you live is the least invasive way to say what was going on, right? Because the home implies the kids and the friends and the parents and the cousins and the pets and what bike you had and, you know, the town and everything like that. So, all right. So we start here. That's the natal position. And then we find out the Chiron is in 70-71 crossing the ascendant. Okay, cool. Next, in 83-84, Chiron makes a square to its natal position. That's called the Chiron first square. It's a very important event. But start with, what was your address? And let the person bring forward their scenario. Describe it gently. You're not looking for like, what happened? Oh, that was when the house was hit by an airplane. But fortunately, it hit the garage. Mom was out shopping. No, we're not looking for that. We're just looking for the general conditions of life. So you can do this in your own chart. Start with the general conditions of life and write a description of the general conditions of life. Next. In September 93, Chiron made an opposition to its natal position. Called the Chiron opposition. Can happen at wide diversity of different ages because of the Chiron variance issue. If you're born with Chiron very fast, you're going to have a Chiron opposition, for example, as young perhaps as age 14. That's 14, 15 is the youngest the opposition can happen. The youngest the square can happen is 7. Kind of like Saturn. All right. So that's the opposition. Then when Chiron crosses the 7th, that's interesting. What were you doing? What was your address? Okay, so I'm looking at the quad alignments, but I'm also, when Chiron does something like cross the 1st house or the 7th house, where there's likely to be some energy, check their address or your address. Do this for yourself first. You will be amazed. You'll see astrology in motion, and you don't need to be an astrologer. You did not need to go to the AFA for 4 years and pack your head with everything and memorize all the meanings of Venus and Mars and all this stuff and through the houses and signs. Just work with the quad alignments of Chiron. And if Chiron makes, you notice Chiron makes a conjunction to Jupiter, and it looks interesting, add that to your list. So there are normally, there's 4 quad alignments, and then there's a bunch of other alignments. So I'll check, for example, I'll often inquire November 77. The discovery degree. Chiron discovered in November 77 at 4 Taurus. That is chironically active. Just whatever you're doing in 77, add that to the mix of the story of Chiron in your life, remembering that this is a form of a story, but because the alignments are so different from something like Saturn, because the cycle is so irregular and so unusual, and because Chiron has a way of pushing things to the forefront that you might not normally notice. Chiron. This is my pitch. Then you might check the midheaven if it's Capricorn sometime in the early 2000s, and then we're back to the Chiron return. And all of these transits lead up to the Chiron return. Right? So that's at about age 50, though I have recently expanded my concept of the Chiron return to be the entire duration of the time that Chiron is in the natal sign that it is in. Right? So if you have Chiron in Pisces, the whole time Chiron's in Pisces is Chiron return, in my new opinion. The other alignments, I give about a time orb of about a year for each one. And sometimes things are a little bit ahead, sometimes they're a little bit behind. And sometimes you might not remember anything, or your client might not remember anything. But they'll call you the next day and say, 1995, how could I forget? That's the year that I climbed Mount Everest. And so what I have found is some of the most relevant, meaningful, exciting, interesting Chiron transits involve the ones that people forget. So don't be fooled. Give it time. Let it simmer. Let it percolate. Sit with it. Now, you may also find that as you go through your Chiron transits, you will notice Chiron making conjunctions to other points. And my theory is that, for example, when Chiron is conjunct your Saturn, it will reveal something of the nature of your Saturn. When Chiron is conjunct your Jupiter, it will reveal something of the nature of your Jupiter. And I used to spend a solid 90-minute session with every client. I probably did this 300 times. And in effect, learned the meanings of the planets, signs, and houses by tracking Chiron, making conjunctions to them. Now, Chiron will tend to bring out unusual manifestations, but that's the one you want. I mean, if you want the usual manifestations in a way that's engaging... This little dog likes to get right under my chair. Henrietta. The book, it's not here. It's downstairs where the real library is. This is just the working library, the like library. A book to get like the basic personality level meanings is Debbie Kempton Smith, who I learned recently died, Secrets from a Stargazer's Notebook. If you want just a really funny, dependable book about the placements of planets, as you go through the Chiron transits to these planets, you're going to find out very personal manifestations, very interesting things about them. If you rewatch this video, you'll get it. You'll figure out how to use this tool. You can use this tool for any of the slower moving points beginning with Saturn. And you get a way to work with transits that doesn't require you to predict anything. This is the scourge of astrology, is it thinks it has to predict. You don't have to predict. You have to observe. And in observing the patterns of the past, you're not using that as a way of predicting the future, but as a way of seeing the way you or someone that you're working with tends to handle situations, tends to handle circumstances. You're picking up on the nuances of my philosophy here, and this is what I do. I used to take an entire session, 90-minute session. I would book everyone in for 3 sessions. If you're a young astrologer and you're getting some confidence, I would suggest booking everyone in for at minimum 2 sessions. Give them a discount, or when you get better, don't give them whatever it is. I would propose it to people in the form of this is a modern form of astrology that listens and is able to work with the whole person. The whole person. That being you, or me, in this case. All right, so we've done something here. We've added a little bit to the internet. I will be back if you're a customer of the Sacred Space of Self. I'm planning to do the cardinal signs first. I'm a little bit behind. I've had some really rough stuff going on in my life that has taken most of my energy the past 6 weeks, but I've managed to, with the help of my staff, I've managed to keep things going. I'm still facing some of these challenges, but I am committed more than anything to doing quality work with these readings in particular, rather than on-time work. So, but I am intending to dive into the cardinal signs tomorrow. So, thank you for your patience and your business, and for trusting me. Please do get a Planet Waves membership. It's very important that we have some consistent, steady income throughout the year. The people I have to pay every week. How it is. The dogs eat every day. Organic. All right. Thanks for being around and for hanging out. Love.